In the Atheist Handbook Part 2, you write about sex crimes in the Old Testament. Can you talk to us about that?
So there is a scholar by the name of Jay Caballero who is he's pretty close to finishing up his PhD down at University of Texas, Austin. He's studying under Bruce Wells. He's a brilliant legal specialist in ancient Near Eastern and Hebrew Bible law. And he's writing his dissertation on sex crimes. And I got the idea sort of from that because, there's an idea sort of floating around that the things that we see in the Old Testament, even though they're called by these bad names, they're not really that bad. The first one that I wrote on was slavery, right? You see slavery popping up in the Old Testament. It's not really slavery, right? It's more like owning a credit card, Watch my eye. I'm winking. Yeah, no, it's not. So I dealt with that in volume 1, right? But something else that comes up quite a bit is the issue of rape, right? Or the issue of adultery. And what you see in the Old Testament is a tremendous imbalance and really some scary legal provisions that are set in place that, if we tried to implement them today, would be disastrous, right? And when people come to the Old Testament to try to, and really when they come to the Bible, to try to develop their ethical system, when you come to passages like this, like slavery, like what's supposed to happen if somebody gets raped, there are a lot of gymnastics taking place, right? Some people become very flexible. And so what I wanted to do is to just go back and look through the law collections that we see in the ancient Near East, and what shows up in the Hebrew Bible in their law collections, and to ask the question, are they the same? Are they different? Is there some radical progressive thought that goes into what we see in the Old Testament and the Hebrew Bible? Or is it sort of just on par, right, with what we see in the law collections from the ancient Near East? Because if it is the case that the Hebrew Bible is a product of its time, we would expect it to just sort of look a lot like what we see in the other legal collections. And as a point of fact, we do, right? I know I'm giving a lot of spoilers here, but I don't think it's going to be any big surprise. So one of the things, I start with adultery and basically asking the question, what is adultery? Like today, when we think about adultery, it's you have a married couple, and if the wife goes and has sex outside of the relationship without consent, the consent of her, her husband, that's adulterous. If the husband goes outside of the relationship and has sex with another woman, doesn't matter what her status is, doesn't matter who she is. If he has sex with her without his wife's, consent, that's considered adultery. But that's not really how it was in the ancient Near East, or in the Hebrew Bible. Adultery was, it's not an offense. When a wife goes outside of the marriage and has sex with another man, that is adultery. If the husband goes outside and has sex with someone who is unmarried, that's not adultery. It's not a crime that's committed against a woman. It's a crime that's committed against the person who has sexual control of a woman. So when can a man be an adulterer? Well, if a man is having sex with a married or betrothed woman, he is called an adulterer. But the crime is not against his wife, if he has one. The crime is against the husband or the father, really in the betrothed, the case of a betrothal or a marriage, it's against the husband, right? But because he has ownership rights, he controls her sexuality. So the crime is against him. And that's a big thing for people to wrap their heads around. And of course, it's something that we would gag at today, right? If somebody tried to implement that. I mean, I hope that we would, as a society, we would say it's incredibly, it's part of this very, very patriarchal system. So basically what I do is I go through the different legal collections and look at the laws that pertain to adultery and what happens, who can do it, what matters, and what matters is the status of the woman. Is she betrothed? Is she married? Is she a virgin that's unbetrothed? Is she a slave? And really, the slave doesn't really factor in here, but and really, the virgin doesn't really much at all either in the adultery section. But what you find is that this is essentially paralleled in the Hebrew Bible. What matters is the status of the woman, and things like intent. Now, when we think about the idea of consent, we think about, if a woman gives consent or does not give consent, then she's either the victim or she's a participant, right? So like when we think about rape, if a woman gives consent, then it's adultery, right? That's the idea here is if a wife gives consent, well, then she's an adulteress. If she doesn't give consent, then she has been raped. And in modern society, she'd be considered a victim, right? It's not quite like that in the ancient Near East. Because the idea of consent is very different. If she, I'll use the idea of consent here because it plays in this particular aspect. If she gives consent, then she's an adulteress. If she does not give consent and she actively fights against her attacker, then she is cleared of guilt. But she's not the victim. Her father, her husband, they're the victim. They're the ones that the crime has been perpetrated against. And so remuneration goes to them, right? Not to the woman. And so it's a very different mindset. It's a mindset where a wife is in very many ways a commodity, right? Where a daughter is a commodity, a slave is a commodity. And so when we think about things like rape, again, in both places, laws in the ancient Near East, laws in the Hebrew Bible, that crime is committed against the man that holds rights to her body, to her sexuality. One of the things that I deal with that is, contested among, online apologists, and really, again, academic apologists as well, is the passage in Deuteronomy 22, 28 to 29. And this is where the text says, it's a whole section there about, sex crimes. And the text says, essentially, if a man finds a woman in a field and he seizes her and he lies with her. And she's a virgin. She's an unbetrothed virgin. You would expect that the man would be killed, right? If we're looking at it through 21st century eyes, and we say, oh my God, he takes her and he rapes her, there should be very severe penalties, a severe penalty for that individual. And I guess in their eyes, there was, it wasn't so much a penalty, but he had to pay the father 50 shekels of silver. And if the father allowed it, then he could marry this woman that he's just raped. But he can't divorce her, right? For the rest of his life, he can't divorce her. Well, that sounds super cringy to us, right? And if you're, again, basing your ethical system off of specifics, like, well, we want to say things, like fundamentalist evangelicals want to say things like, look, right here in Leviticus, it says that homosexuality is, they should be killed, right? So that's what we should do. Well, okay, well, you going with Deuteronomy 22, 28, 29 as well? Like, where are we at? Come on, my guy. And so there's been a push against this meaning rape. And what they want it to mean is like seduction. And they want it to be like she consents, essentially. Because if she consents, then it's not such a big deal from their perspective. Well, this is just some party girl that's going out and having sex behind the back of her dad. And so then the punishment makes sense, right? But I go through and show, and again, I won't bore people with the details here, but I go through and show that verse actually specifically is describing rape, because that's a big deal from a linguistic standpoint. We go through the Hebrew and I show examples of how it is that, it means rape. But this is really problematic because it shows that the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, is participating in this patriarchal system, right? And it's following suit. So there's not this great progression that's been made morally or ethically in the Hebrew Bible. And again, just in closing, I guess what I would say is people should read, in addition to this book, if they're interested in what would happen if you would build your value system off of the Bible, the problems that you would encounter. John Collins has a book called What Are Biblical Values? It's a really easy read, but he goes through all these different topics, slavery, abortion, sex crimes, these sorts of things, and says, if you built your ethical, your value system off of this, what would it look like? What are biblical values? And I think my chapter is just designed to say, look, there's not this great, ethical progression, moral progression that's taken place with these Judean scribes who are writing this. Instead, in fact, it's a product of the time, and they're sort of following suit with what is around them for the most part.
Dr. Bowen, thank you.
My pleasure.